Hello and welcome to Stories of the Journey Home. I've got a story for you today. Once upon a time, there was a man, a scientist indeed, and he was absolutely driven to finding the source of all life. Where had it come from and why had it come? These were questions that didn't just bother him, they obsessed him. He was constantly trying to find the clues, the evidence, the truth of why did life even emerge in the first place? What was it that caused life to come into being here? And so he started studying the very smallest creatures on the supposition that they were the earliest, the first creatures, the very tiny microscopic things. And he would study them and learn all about their cell reproduction and their division and everything that brought them into being and that sustained them. But most of all, he was looking for the spark, you see. He was looking for that spark, where it had come from, what had brought it into being. But no matter how hard he tried, no matter how deeply he delved into the workings of these tiny organisms, he still couldn't find it. He still couldn't find it. But all this passion, you see, it's driven this work with such incredible ingenuity that over the course of his studies, well, he's developed new theorems, he's uncovered new patterns and published many scientific papers, and he's winning plaudits and awards and great recognition for his work. But this is a little bit frustrating because it's not really what he wants. He wants to find the answer to his question. And so after many years of this, of achieving great success and yet his one meaningful success eluding him, he decides to go up a level. He decides to take his studies to the next level and he starts studying insects. Yes, he starts studying insects. He thinks if the microbes wouldn't yield their secrets, why maybe something more complex will. And so he starts studying the insects with the same level of passion and ingenuity. And soon he's developing new theorems. Soon he's winning awards. But even as the awards stack up, even as the peer-reviewed scientific journals accumulate and his recognition grows, why? The thing that's driving him, this quest, this passion, this urgency to find out where had all this come from, it remains completely out of reach. It's like just around the corner, it seems, and yet he never arrives. And he's so driven. He's got such an urgency inside of him. But why? He just keeps on going until he comes to what feels like the limits of what insects can tell him about anything. And at that point, he makes the decision that, well, if the insects aren't going to yield what he needs, he has to go up higher. He has to take it to another level and start studying why the animals. And so that's what he does. He starts studying all manner of animals. He starts studying reptiles, and mostly he starts studying the mammals. You see, he's searching, always searching, and trying to find it in this more complex biology. But although, just as before, he's developing new theorems and winning awards for his groundbreaking work, although the awards are piling up, as are the scientific articles, his quest is no nearer to its conclusion than it was at the very, very beginning. And it starts to drive him mad after a time. It starts to drive him mad. And he finds himself faced with a terrible realization that maybe there's only one thing left, and that's to study humans. And one night he's discussing this with his wife, who's a patient and a kind, loving woman who stood by him and put up with him for years and years. He's discussing this with her and saying how much despair he's in. Because he's not an anthropologist, and surely that's what it would take. Because if he couldn't find in the cell biology, well, it's got to be hidden somewhere in the patterns of behaviour. It's got to be hidden in the greater complexity that he always seems to be driven towards, as if that held the answer. But I'm not an anthropologist. What am I supposed to do? This is probably the end of my career. I should just go back to start studying microbes again. And his wife, she looks at him. And she takes him in. She takes him in over the course of knowing him all these years. And she says, darling, why don't you just imagine that just for tonight, it's really over. Your career, everything, is just over. Why not? And although at first this is a shocking idea, it's also rather plausible. It's so inviting. It seems to offer an immense possibility for resting. And so he simply takes it on, just as an idea, just as a what if. And just for that night, he lets the boat of his passion just drift away downriver, as if it's no longer his concern, as if it's going off to bother somebody else. Not him, not anymore. And they have a lovely time that evening. Oh, I don't know what it was. Maybe it was simply this thought experiment of letting everything go. Maybe it's the fact that they haven't really spent much time together. Not like that anyway. But as the evening goes on and they go to bed, something comes over him. A great tenderness and a presence just comes over him. And he's never been like that with his wife before, never so present, never so loving, never so alive. It's a moment of exquisite sweetness. And it's over too soon. And the next morning, when he wakes up, he notices that his dream is still far away. That boat of his work is still drifting far downriver. And it's got nothing to do with him. It's still got nothing to do with him. He likes this morning. He hasn't woken up like this for decades. And anyway, what was that last night? What was that happened between he and his wife? What was that tenderness? That beauty, that sweetness, that presence? What was that? Wait a second. Maybe I have already started studying humans. Maybe I already have started, and maybe this is the first glimpse of an answer. That moment of beauty, that moment of stillness, of tenderness, maybe that's what started everything. Maybe that's a clue. And he goes back to his wife, and he tells her everything, and he doesn't really let her do anything else that morning. And well, it's very nice, but it's the weekend after all, and it's a nice weekend, really wonderful weekend. But when Monday comes, she says, look, I've still got a career, and I do actually need to get back to it. He says, oh no, please stay. I feel like I'm just getting something here. I'm just on it. And she sees the look in his eyes. And she says, no way. Not with me. Not that with me. No, she says. I'm not your experiment. And she goes to work and she leaves him in despair. And this goes on because she's quite clear she's not wanting to mix business with pleasure with him. Not that way. You need to come to me without anything else that you're wanting. So now he's really in despair. He doesn't know where else to turn. It's like a glimpse was revealed to him and then taken away. And one night he just goes to a bar. He's sunken that low. He's just drifted out of everything he thought he might end up doing, and he just has nothing to do anymore. And he just wanders off to a bar and has a drink. And he's sitting there, just nursing his pint. When looking around, he sees there's this really big guy who's staring straight at him. Kind of threatening, you could say, because he doesn't waver in his gaze. It's just like that, straight ahead. And our friend, he's trying not to look in that direction. He's finding other things to look at. But when he turns around again and sees in that corner the same guy is still looking straight at him. Well, now he's properly freaked out. He turns around, he puts his back to that corner. But when he turns around again, why? That big guy is right there next to him, right there sitting next to him. And he says, "Are you looking for something?" No, not looking for anything. I'm just having a drink." "You look like you're looking for something." I don't know what you mean." "I can see it in your eyes. You are looking for something so hard, it's driving you mad, isn't it?" Well, it's maybe something about the way the guy looks at him then. Something about his penetrating gaze, his insight. It puts our friend at ease. He says, "Well, I guess I am looking for something, but it's driving me mad." And right there and then, he comes out with the whole story. He comes out with the whole story about the microbes and the insects and the animals, and then his wife, and the trouble there, and now his despair. "You need to come and see my mum," says the guy. "Your mum? Why would I want to see your mum?" "You don't want to see my mum?" No, I didn't mean it like that. It's just, I don't understand." "You'll understand. Come and see my mum, you'll understand everything. My mum tell you everything you need. Come." And off he goes. He turns round at the door and our friend's still sitting there. "Come on," he says. So what's he to do? But just dive out into the night, following that big guy into the darkness. And they walk, and they walk, and they walk to the very edges of town. Eventually, they come to that big guy's mother's house. And he nips inside. He's gone a few minutes. And when he comes back, he says, "My mother will see you now." Our friend, he goes knocking on the door, and there appears in the doorway the loveliest older woman he's ever seen. She really is old enough to be his mother. But she's absolutely radiant. She's absolutely radiantly beautiful. He swore he's never seen anyone her age look that lovely. But anyway, she invites him in, and she says, "Now, how can I help you?" And he looks around her living room, and to his horror, it looks like a boudoir. Everything is all silky and red and chaise lounge and lovely, and she herself is dressed well. He says, what am I doing here?" She says, "That's the question, isn't it? what are we all doing here? No, I mean, what am I doing here with you? She says, I'm going to give you some answers. And she pushes him down on the chaise longue and she climbs on top of him. Oh, what are you doing with me? He says, I'm going to awaken pleasure in you. Pleasure? He says, you don't really understand pleasure, do you? Well, I... Well now, she says, I'm going to tell you all about it. And with that, why, what does she do? But she starts to tell him a story. A story. And that's the story I'm going to tell you now. Once upon a time, the goddess of all creation was walking in her pleasure garden. Such beauty, the roses, the bushes, such heavenly, transporting beauty. And one time she had her friends round, gods and goddesses of their own creations, all of them. And they were admiring the beauty of her pleasure gardens themselves. And one of them, a god of whom she was especially fond, said, "Your gardens are exquisite. Such roses, such petals. It is enough to transport a person to heaven itself. But we are already in heaven. So what is the point of your pleasure garden? What is the point of all of this if no one is truly served by it?" And she didn't really have an answer for that. She didn't really know what to say. She was quite sure there must be a reason because she loved her pleasure garden so much. But she told the god of whom she was especially fond that she would sleep on it and let him know the answer soon. And that night when she went to sleep, why, she opened herself to an answer to her question. And in her dreams, why, she saw the answer appear. She saw a woman, very much like herself, indeed the perfect image. The only difference was that this woman had forgotten that she was a goddess, entirely forgotten that that was who she really was. And when the goddess woke up, she said, "Yes, of course, that's what it needs." And so every night in her dreams, she dreamt this creature more fully into form. She dreamt her more fully into form. Every night in her dreams. Until when she woke up, that creature was still there, although fading to smoke that drifted away in the air. So the goddess dreamed her more vividly, in every detail, in every way, how she was exactly like herself, but had forgotten this fact. And every morning, why, this creature appeared more substantially, until one morning, there she was. And she remained solid, even as the goddess awoke. she said, you are perfect. You are perfect. Look at you. Now, I must send you somewhere where it's hard to remember. And so she created the earth. And she sent her creation down to the earth and, so she'd have a bit of company. Why, she made a creature in the image of the God whom she rather liked, and who too had forgotten, and sent him down with her creation, such that they would keep each other company and populate the earth in all four corners. And so it was that people filled the earth, and in every climate, on every land. They filled the earth, but each one of them had forgotten who they were. Until there came a young woman who became possessed of a certain desire, which was, she felt quite sure that she had to know who she was. She'd forgotten something essential. She'd forgotten the most essential thing about herself, and she was not who she thought she was. She was something else, and she had to remember that. And so all through her childhood, she asked every single adult, who am I really? And nobody could tell her. And so as a young woman, why, she went around the world trying to find the answer, but couldn't find it. And in the end, she just retreated to a city and back to a life. And she tried to make something of that life, but the question wouldn't go away and kept on distracting her. Who am I really? Who am I really? Who am I really? Until one night, she went to bed. And quite desperate, she prayed that she would remember who she really was. And in her dreams, why, she found herself in the goddess's pleasure garden. Yes, she found herself in the pleasure garden of the goddess. Such roses, such beauty everywhere. It transported her to a heavenly remembrance of, yes, this is who I am. This is who I really am. And just as she had that remembrance, why, there came walking towards her a woman dressed in the most beautiful clothes, who looked strangely like her. And the goddess said, there's one thing you are forgetting. And with that, our friend woke up. And all that day she was like, what is it I'm forgetting? What's the one thing I'm forgetting? I wish I knew what the one thing I was forgetting was. And so when she went to bed that night, why, she prayed and she prayed that she would find herself once again back in the pleasure garden of the goddess. And just as before, why, in her dreams, there she was. Transported back to that remembrance of who she really was. Of who she really was. But no sooner was this clear than the goddess came towards her dressed in flowing gold. And she said, there's one thing you are forgetting. And with that, faded away, and the garden faded away, and our friend woke up in the night. Well, after a few nights of this, indeed after a few weeks of this, the goddess has her friends round. And she's talking to them and telling them of what's happened. But when she gets to the bit about, well, she keeps on saying this one thing, and at that point, this woman fades into nothingness and is back in her world again. Her friend, the god, he said, "But this is cruel. What are you doing? You have to tell her what that one thing is she's forgetting." The goddess, she said, well, she'd been trying to work out how to do that bit, but you see, she'd made her so thoroughly forget that she didn't quite know how to make her remember. But she'd think on it, she'd sleep on it, and she'd let him know what she came up with. And so every night when she goes to bed, why, she invokes something that will bring her the answer she needs. She asks for a way of reminding her creation who she really is. And one night it appears before her, an elixir of remembrance in a little bottle. Yes, an elixir of remembrance. And she becomes quite clear that this is how she can remind her. But when she wakes up in the morning, why, it just fades away. It just fades away like smoke. And so every night she remembers it and she dreams of it more and more thoroughly until in the morning, why, this elixir of remembrance, it remains solid such that she can pick it out of the air and bring it into the garden and wait for the woman to arrive. And so the next time that she dreams, that young woman, she arrives in the goddess's pleasure garden. And when the goddess appears and says, "There's one thing you're forgetting," she hands her that bottle. And the young woman takes a drink. And as soon as one drop is in her mouth, she is back home in bed, and yet everything is different. Everything's different now. The moonlight is shining in through the window. The sheets are illuminated with an unearthly light. Just the touch of cotton on her skin. She steps out of the bed and stands up, and the weight of her own body, why, everything reminds her of the goddess's pleasure garden. She slips on her clothes and she goes out walking, and the night air reminds her of the goddess's pleasure garden. The sight of the moon and the stars, indeed everything that meets her gaze, it all reminds her of who she really is. For that elixir of remembrance has made it abundantly clear. She is the goddess herself. She is a divine being, only caused to forget so that she could remember, all for the goddess's pleasure. And now nothing can shake her out of this realization. No, nothing in her world can shake her out of this self-realization. And she goes about her life secure in the knowledge of who she is and who she always has been. And the old woman comes to the end of her story. And our friend, the scientist, why, he thanks her very much, and he dusts himself down, and he goes out into the night, and he walks around in a daze. And the moon is shining, and everything seems different, and he wanders home, and he finds his way back to his house, and he gets inside this bedroom, and he wakes his wife up, and he says, "My darling, I've found it. I found the thing I've been looking for. And she says, what's going on? And he says, look, just let me tell you the story. And he tells her the same story that he's just heard. But when he gets to the bit where the goddess is saying, there's one thing you've forgotten, his wife interrupts the story and says, what's he forgetting? What's she forgetting? What does she keep on forgetting? What's the thing that she's not remembering? And this throws him off so badly that he can't remember the rest of the story. He tries to explain things, but he gets ahead of himself and then gets himself in a muddle, and he can't remember how it ends. He says, I'll just go back and ask her. But the next day, when he goes back, her house is no longer there. Same neighborhood, but where her house stood, why, there's just a scrubby patch with lots of rubble and bits of rubbish, but no sign that anyone or any house was there. He takes to frequenting the bar, hoping the big guy will show up. No one's seen him. But he was huge. You couldn't have missed him. No one there ever saw him, they say. And so he becomes rather desperate. He becomes rather desperate until one night, it occurs to him to pray for an answer, to pray to remember the end of the story. And when he dreams, he wakes up in the pleasure garden of the goddess. And she comes to him and she says, there's one thing you're forgetting. And with that, he woke up. And immediately it was clear to him. Immediately he could remember the story, and he woke his wife up again and he told her the rest of the story. And she rather liked it. But after that, he never again forgot. And from that moment on, he realized what he would study next and how. For he decided from that moment on to study life itself. Life itself, meaning everything that happened to him in his own life. He studied it, but not with his mind, rather with his heart, with his full attention, everything that came. For everything that arose in his experience, it just drew him back to the pleasure garden of the goddess. Everything that arose, even the most unexpected things, even they would take him back to the pleasure garden of the goddess, where everything is all about remembrance, where everything pointed him back to his own true nature. And I met that guy. I did. I met him at some scientific symposium about the convergence of spirituality and science. And I found him in some side room giving a talk, not very well attended, but I was there. And at the end, I said, this is amazing. You're kind of like an egghead scientist. What are you doing talking about stuff like this? The stuff I'm interested in. And he looked me up and down. He sized me up. He said, what's your profession, my friend? I said, I'm a storyteller. And then he laughed. He laughed uproariously. I said, why is it so funny? He said, I've been waiting for someone I can actually tell the story to, and you're the first one. And right there and then, he told me the story that I've told you. The very same story, the very same one that I've just told you.